The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. This is Nicole Rose from the Department of Early Learning, and we're going to wait just another moment to allow some more people to join, and we will get started in just a few minutes. And I just want to check, can everybody hear me? If so, can you please type into the box that you can hear what I'm saying? Great, thank you. Okay, thanks everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started, and we are going to start with Heather Moss giving us an overview and welcoming us to this conversation.
Hi everybody, and thank you for joining this call with us. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you here, Heather.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So I just want to say thanks again to everybody for continuing to partner with us on this great alignment work. We're making some good progress. A team of Dell staff just got back late last night from Washington, D.C., where we had a 4-day-long conversation about implementing CCDF regulations. And one of the themes throughout that conversation with the feds and with all of our partners in the other 50 states was the importance of alignment, not only in standards but in the monitoring work we do. So it's gratifying to go back to D.C. and really get a sense that we're on the right track and that we're really ahead in the field of our peers in thinking about early childhood settings and how we simplify the standards that we hold providers to. So I just want you all to take note that we're on the right track. So we have a few things to cover today. We are going to hear from Nicole and Rachel, who will talk about the progressions and the work that they're doing and acknowledge some of the accomplishments we've made so far. Rachel will talk in more detail about a draft of some work we've done right now on TA coordination across different systems. And then Sonia will give us a great update on the weighted WAC methodology. So this is really exciting work that we're going to be doing with the National Association of Regulatory Agencies. And then we'll hear from Debbie and Kelly, who are sort of leading the charge in the specific pieces of work we're doing around progression development. And then finally, Nicole will end the conversation with summary and next steps. So again, I'm going to stay on the phone for a while, but I'll be on mute, and I just want to, again, thank you all for being a part of this process. So I think with that, I will turn it back over to you, Nicole.
Great, thanks Heather. And I just want to echo Heather's thanks for everyone participating in this process. And as I participated in STAM this conference this last week, it was, as Heather said, really reaffirming to see again that we're leaders in this work and that we're headed in the right direction. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the celebrations that we've had so far. As we've done this work to really create one set of quality standards across early achievers, licensing, and ECAP, there have been some big and small wins. And I think it's important just to take some time to really go over what some of those have been, because you all have been some key players in that work. So one of the things that we have done is we now have some And there has been extensive review both here internally at the Department of Early Learning and through our advisory committee, and there has been feedback that has been incorporated into that process. And so, you know, all of the feedback that we're getting is really important as we think about this. We have begun the weighted WAC process that has been developed. There is a timeline that has been announced with that, along with the WAC and progression timeline. And we're going to talk about the weighted WAC process a little bit later, as well as some of the progression work. As we think about really aligning our monitoring and our quality improvement processes, there's been a lot of conversation with Child Care Aware of Washington and the Department of Early Learning to really think about how we can streamline that process for not only providers, but streamline some of our processes here as well. And so a lot of that work has focused around licensing and early achievers, and we will be incorporating ECAP into that work as well. We have created the internal process for developing the early achievers and ECAP progressions. And one of the things that we have really modeled throughout this process from the beginning is that really having those cross-writing teams, so that anytime we're doing any kind of writing on these progressions, that there's someone from licensing, someone from early achievers, and someone from ECAP involved, so that we can really look across that full progression and also really bring the knowledge and expertise that all of those groups bring to the table. I talked a little bit about feedback before and focused on the internal DEL and advisory committee pieces, but one of the things we've done throughout this process is also do some ongoing feedback and engagement in a couple of other intentional areas. The first one was an opportunity we had just a couple of weeks ago at the Elevate conference that was put on by Child Care Aware of Washington that really brought together all of their staff as well as others to come together and celebrate the work that's happening around coaching technical assistants and early achievers. And there was a great opportunity to have some roundtable discussions that were led by Heather Moss, Angela Abrams, Rachel Brown-Kendall, and Dieta Simmons. As we really, again, we're seeking feedback around what would this look like as we go to implement this draft WAC in our early learning settings. The other piece that we have been incorporating is getting feedback specifically from our tribes here in Washington State. And so there was a conversation that happened recently at the Indian Policy for Early Learning, and there is some work that will come out of that to continue the engagement of all of our tribes here in Washington as we think as well about how this will work, again, in our variety of early learning settings and really thinking about tribes as sovereign nations as part of this work. I believe the last time that we talked, we also talked about some of the new timelines around the WAC process, and that we've really got a lot of great content in the WAC, and it was developed by some great writing teams, and now it's time to have a technical writer really take a look at that and help us figure out the places where we can really enhance and hone in on that technical language. And so we're excited to have that technical writer on board here at the Department of Early Learning. So in the theme of really work across systems and how do we really create one system of early learning, which has been a big role of the department here in the last several years, we really wanted to have some visuals about how we think about, we integrate these systems, because the ultimate goal is we want to streamline processes, leverage resources, and maximize outcomes so that we're really getting to 90% of school readiness, the bold goal that Director Hunter has set for us. And so in this visual, what you see is some way that we're thinking about some of our work here in the department across licensing, early achievers, and ECAP. And so what you see along the bottom is that professional development is something that really happens at all of those levels. And as we think about the progressions, licensing really is that foundational quality, health, and safety measures that really promote strong development and make sure that children are safe and healthy in their learning environments. And as we think about the progressions, the next layer is really early achievers, where we think about what are some of those key pieces we've seen that are aligned with quality that are tied to child outcomes, and how do we think about supporting that and bringing that to a larger scale as we think about the implementation of early achievers through the Early Start Act. And then the third arrow that you see here is ECAP. So thinking about, as we set that foundation of basic health and safety and licensing, layered on some of those quality standards and early achievers, what are those additional pre-K supports that we need for our state's most at-risk children? And so the goal here really is to not duplicate efforts, but to really align all of those pieces and leverage those resources. So this next slide really is just another visual and way to think about this work. So you see here licensing, early achievers, and ECAP. And you just see some of the ways that we're thinking about how this work will play out. So licensing will have a big role in supporting the new standards and implementing those new licensing standards with fidelity, thinking about provider outreach, recruitment, and retention. When we think about early achievers, what we would like to see is the increase of number of providers who are achieving that level 4, and thinking about how we're really increasing the coaching and technical assistance capacity based on the information that we're receiving from those ratings and from feedback from our licensors and technical assistance coaches. And in ECAP, some of the things that we're focused on as we think about entitlement is really how do we make sure there's enough facilities. How are we making sure there's an infrastructure for mixed delivery, which is why this alignment with licensing and early achievers is so important. We want to be able to serve kids where they may already be receiving services and ensure that they're getting all of the supports that they need to do that. And the other things that you see in ECAP and early achievers is really this look at coaching and how do we begin to really build up the site level capacity to do coaching and some of the having some building leadership to help implement some of those quality improvement processes. As you look across those cross-system elements, some things that we're really trying to think about is what does the monitoring system look like? Again, with this eye to an aligned monitoring system. And that really is the direction that the feds are going, so it's great that we're, again, thinking about that. Thinking about cost modeling. So this is something where we're thinking about what is the cost of quality. Again, professional development goes along all of this, and that professional development really is not only for our providers, but also thinking about our internal DEL staff as well as we implement these new standards, and as well as those professionals that support providers along their continuous quality improvement process. So on the next slide, this just really gives some examples of how collectively we're working together to take a systems approach. And the reason this becomes so important is that as we build this progression and as we think about serving all eligible children in ECAP, as we think about supporting providers through their continuous quality improvement process, we really are working all together with the same providers, children, and families. So as much as we can highlight, not only for ourselves, but for the field, where there's some examples of strong alignment and people working together, it's extremely important. So in professional development, an example here is really thinking about how professional development standards are increasing at every level in the system. And so thinking about how we build capacity at all levels to support our goal of ensuring that our educators are highly qualified so that they can work with children, which we know leads to increased child outcomes. An example around licensing and working together with licensing. As we think about the aligned set of standards, we know that we're moving to ECAP sites becoming licensed. This is something that was required under the Early Start Act. And what it means is we need to really think about how we're building up the capacity of our licensors to be able to license and monitor up to about 500 additional sites. And that number is really taking into account where we need to get by school year 2020-21. In Early Achievers, we're really thinking through, as we know that the Early Start Act requires sites to achieve a level 4, how do we make sure that providers not only in ECAP but those that might want to become ECAP are really making it through that pipeline. So what does that process look like from their entry to their level 2 rating? What does their continuous quality improvement look like? And making sure we have the right players at the right places to make sure that people can achieve those rating levels and then increase their opportunity to offer ECAP. When we think about ECAP, there's a lot of work that we've been doing with our partners at Child Care Aware and the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction and others in the community, including the Washington State Association of Head Start and ECAP, to do a lot of work to think about how do we make sure as we expand that there are enough facilities for children to receive. And this, again, is a key reason why it's so important to work together and continue to increase the quality of our licensed child care settings, because some of those children eligible for ECAP are in those settings, and we know it's best practice to really provide that continuity of care for them and decrease the amount of transitions. We're also looking at how are our coaching and technical assistance systems aligned to really look at the variety of ECAP models that we are implementing, and really with that focus on what the research is telling us that full day and extended day, that increased dosage really has an impact, again, on child and family outcomes. So a lot of our conversations in the past have been focused heavily on the licensing piece and getting that draft WAC done and the community feedback around that. And now we're continuing to look at those pieces and then really build out the continued progression of early achievers and ECAP. And Kelly will talk a little bit about that, that specific piece, but there are some other things that have happened since the draft WAC that have come out that we want to call folks' attention to. We are continuing to do feedback. So as I noted previously, some specific places where that has happened recently were at the Elevate conference in the Indian Policy for Early Learning community. I know we're having some conversations with the Washington State Association of Head Start and ECAP about doing some focus groups at their directors meeting as well. Heather talked about the new CCDF rules that have been finalized. The other thing that is out there now are the new Head Start performance standards, and this has been an ongoing conversation, and we are sort of waiting for those rules to be finalized, and they have been. And so Caitlin Jensen, State Collaboration Office Director, is going to really lead the process of creating a crosswalk with the new Head Start performance standards and the standards progressions, starting with the draft WACs and then the early achievers and ECAP drafts when available. As we've said, there is some direction coming down from the federal level about really thinking about how we're streamlining monitoring and continuous quality improvement. And so part of what we want this group to also do is explore opportunities around coordination with other systems such as Early Head Start, so we can really think about how many people are going in and monitoring a provider, sometimes within one given year or even within 1 month. So again, we're streamlining that process. Some things that we continue to do here at VEL is continue that internal collaboration between licensing, ECAP, and early achievers. We recently had a really great meeting bringing everybody together across those divisions to really think about where are some opportunities for us to do some joint monitoring visits. Some other things that are happening are developing collaborative regional teams so that there's a point person in each region and licensing office that knows who they're connecting with about early achievers and about ECAP. And then we are talking about what should our aligned monitoring cycles look like, what are the protocols we should have around that, what are the procedures we should have around that, and thinking about it not just as monitoring, but also what is the technical assistance piece that we should be doing there as well. So what's that continuous quality improvement? And we're doing some work with our partners at Child Care Aware to really strengthen that collaboration with them. And again, really doing some work to make those intentional connections across our technical assistance specialists, licensors, pre-K specialists so that we're all working together with a shared message to best support the providers that are serving our children and families. So I'm going to pause here for a moment and see if there are any questions. So the questions are you going to report on what's in the decision package related to licensing alignment? And that was not something we had planned to share today. That should be in our webinar that's recorded around decision packages. The decision package, and Luba, you can chime in if you would like, was focused on some of the CCDF requirements. When we are talking about licensing, we're really talking about what are some of the internal pieces we're doing right now. Luba, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you please repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was, are we going to share within the licensing alignment decision package today? And what I said was there was a webinar on what was in all of our decision packages, and that when we talk about licensing alignment work, some of that work is part of what we're really doing internally right now.
Yes, it's correct. And again, as soon as we will be sharing the information or how legislation will perceive the information of what we would like to do in regard of the alignment and licensing alignment, it will be shared with the community as soon as we will have a chance to share it. But again, I think the information has been presented today in some ways giving you a chance to understand the direction that we're taking.
And so, Luba, I'm going to keep you on the line for just another moment. So the other question is about how are we incorporating feedback from the community meetings that we are hearing, like things at Elevate and IPEL. And I would say some of what we're doing with that is taking it back and incorporating it as we think about the early achievers and ECAT progressions. Are there other pieces you would like to share about that, Luba?
Yes, I do know that I just had a conversation to do today with Thrive by 5. They're finalizing their feedback report, and all of the comments from the feedback report been included into their latest version of the draft of the rules, of the licensing rules that our technical writer, or actually the person who we recently hired who has a legal degree and also the experience in writing rules as well as policies and procedures, is helping us to review the latest drafts, as well as we have an engagement from the Attorney General team helping us to review the current draft. So we're embedding the feedback, and at the same time, as we all discussed, we're polishing the draft, preparing them for the waiting work process, and we will talk about it today.
Great, thank you. So we have one other question about the 90% goal of school readiness. And so what percentage of young children in Washington are included in programs monitored by DEL systems? So our goal is really related to all children in Washington and thinking about the variety of ways that we might reach them, whether they are in a formal system or not formal system. I know we have that percentage, and I don't want to say a number right now because I don't want to get it wrong, unless Luba or Heather, you have that percentage in your mind. So it's an interesting question, but we're really committed to ensuring that all children and putting that bold goal of 90% are ready for kindergarten. So that's why it's so important that we are working with multiple partners and thinking about the variety of ways we have to do that to make that possible.
I will add to it, if I may, Nicole, that we're also looking at different groups and populations around the state and analyzing data, also at linguistic, racial, ethnic groups, in analyzing data in regard of where the children are and what particular services the state is offering for them, and what services, what parent choices are in place. So where our children are. So we're specifically looking at data to make right decisions in regard of how to approach 90% goal in consideration with variety of services and diversity of our children and families.
Thanks, Luba. And so the question about how many children DEL serves, I just want to reframe that we can get that number, but just to give you a sense of where we're at with kindergarten readiness in our state, based on the WALKids data from the previous school year, we have about 44 to 46% of children who are coming into kindergarten ready, as defined by ready on all 6 domains in Teaching Strategies Gold. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and pass this off to Rachel, who is going to talk with us about some of the draft plans around technical assistance coordination.
Great, thank you, Nicole. Hi, everybody. So I wanted to give you an update on our work related to technical assistance coordination between licensing and child care aware. So as you can see on the slide, we've done some work to date. DEL has made the decision that as we are aligning our standards, it's also really important for us to be aligning our work. And so one of those pieces is having the initial early achievers technical assistance responsibility be taken on by licensing. And so licensing will help with that initial enrollment into early achievers and orientation and supporting providers in those first phases of their early achievers participation. In order to do that work, there's been some partnership happening between our early achievers team and our licensing team within DEL, working in partnership with Child Care Aware to figure out what is it exactly we need to do in order to support a smooth transition for both the people that are doing the work, but most importantly for the providers, so that they're receiving the same level of service they need in order to be successful within both licensing and early achievers. So we have drafted out a plan and, really to focus on providing foundational early achievers training to licensing staff, and also to provide foundational licensing training to early achievers field workers, so that everybody is coming at it with the same kind of foundational information. So we're being accurate and developing stronger relationships between different people within the system that are supporting the same providers. So in addition to providing that foundational training, we also need to develop a sequence for additional technical assistance for licensing staff to help them implement this technical assistance with providers. So what are those additional things that folks across the state need in order to successfully implement early achievers technical assistance? So in order to do that, we have decided that we need to implement a pilot in order to practice what technical assistance will look like, and then be able to refine that practice based on the information coming back from a pilot. So we'll take the time to evaluate the pilot and modify, perhaps it's providing additional training, maybe it's a change in practice, maybe there's additional mentoring that we will need to have happen. But we want to be able to have that time to practice those things so that we can have a successful large-scale implementation during 2017 and 2018. Now, as we've been looking at this, it became very apparent the critical nature of including ECAP into this process. And so our immediate next steps are pulling together additional people to be a part of this team to figure out how do we incorporate ECAP into this technical assistance piece to ensure that we're hitting all the right pieces at the right time. So we just had a meeting this week with Debbie O'Neill and myself, and then Tiffany Stutzman from Child Care Aware of Washington, to discuss some next steps. And we need to include that, getting that ECAP team member into that process so that we can start developing a more robust and inclusive work plan to address our next steps. So I think that's it on that slide. So does anybody have any questions?
Okay, so there are a couple of questions, and I'm going to read them, and what I will be transparent about is that some of these things are still in process, but I'm going to read them, and Rachel, you can answer them as you see fit. So what will the user experience look like for providers during the 2-year transition of TA from CCA to DEL?
That's a great question, and something that we're just in these beginning phases of figuring out what it will look like for licensors and the current TA staff, but we really want to have a productive experience for providers who are accessing these services. So if there are suggestions that you have about how we can best meet needs, I'm absolutely welcome to hearing them. I think it will be really important for us to have licensors involved in the process of developing what technical assistance will look like, as well as regional TA and regional coordinator experience from the child care aware system, so that we can learn from what has been working and we can continue to refine and ensure that we are supporting providers to the best of our ability.
Great, thank you. So the next question is thinking about if there's an inherent conflict between being the person who comes in to identify stuff you're out of compliance on in licensing, and then being someone who develops a supportive relationship to coach providers in what has proven to be a very challenging and time-intensive process before rating. So I will answer some of this and then pass this on to Rachel as well. So again, I will say that from the federal direction, there was quite a bit of conversation that monitoring and visits with providers really need to not be just about what's out of compliance. Rather, what are some ways we can support providers? What are some technical assistance pieces that we can give? The question around all of the pre-rating pieces, this is exactly why we're doing a pilot to take a look at what does this process look like. I will say that there have been successes in the past, and we have models where we have seen someone can be providing some feedback around compliance and technical assistance at the same time. So I think there are areas where this has worked that we can build on, but this is also why it's so important to have a pilot to do this work. Rachel, is there anything you would like to add to that?
I think you hit the nail right on the head. That is exactly what I would say as well.
And so all of this work is to really think about how are we, again, meeting the needs of providers, streamlining the amount of visits and people who are coming in and providing guidance and technical assistance, and then also thinking about how we're really leveraging resources. So there's another question about who will be included in the pilot, and all of these things are to be determined. As Rachel said, the next step really for us is to bring ECAP into this conversation so we can really think about how are we looking, again, across the whole progression. Okay, so if there are no other questions on this topic, I'm going to turn this over to Sonia, who's going to talk with us about the weighted WAC process. She has been leading this process. So Sonia, you should be unmuted now.
I am. Thank you very much. So you can see here in the weighted WAC timeline that we are quickly approaching our projected start date. We were hoping to begin this process in November, and the actual weighting of the WAC will go through to March of 2017. This is just the first part of the entire process that we're going to have to look over the next couple of years. So this is the actual weighting methodology that I will be reviewing. So if you could go to the next slide. And many of you are already familiar with this, but for those who are not, this is what the current methodology looks like. At the top in the purple that you see, that there are all of our licensing rules, and this is what our licensors refer to as a full checklist. This is where they go out and they look at all of the rules on their annual monitoring visits. We also employ the methodology of differential monitoring. And what that is how often a visit is conducted and what is reviewed is kind of dependent on how the licensor or the licensee is performing. So for example, if they have a valid complaint within the last 12 months, we ask the licensors to do a full checklist. If they also, there's another piece down here and it's at the bottom, it's in yellow. If they also hit a key indicator, they also do a full checklist. If the provider is in good standings without these, they can complete a short checklist or the abbreviated monitoring tool. So that's what our differential monitoring looks like. Again, we do employ the key indicators. In our abbreviated tool, those indicators are those that are those regulations that are most likely to predict further complications in the checklist, so that's why they go to the long checklist. What we don't employ at the moment is the risk assessment or the weights, and that's the process that we're looking at doing now. A weighted WAC or the weighted methodology are those standards that are most likely to provide increased risk of injury or even fatality to children. So those are the ones that we really want to look at and weight. If you want to go to the next slide. So here's our timeline. We're hoping to begin in November. So this process begins with gathering together some key stakeholders for focus groups to decide which WAC we're going to include into the weighting process. So as we look at the whole spectrum, you can envision that we have certain WAC that are very, very clearly defined as providing guidance for the health and safety of children. And then we have those that are certainly providing the guidance for quality improvement and programming. And then we have a set kind of in the middle that overlap and address both. So we have to decide which WAC are going to go into these. We're only going to be weighting a certain amount of the health and safety WAC. I do understand that the methodology has 5 to 10% of those that will be weighted into our core rules, but it is possible that through these focus groups, we can use those numbers in a little bit different way. So those that's the intent of those focus groups. And then in December, we're going to deploy a survey. So the survey is how we do the weighting. We need to send this out to at least 200 participants, and they will be asked questions on a Likert scale. So for example, how important is hand washing on a scale of 1 to 10? We take all of that information back for collection and analysis, and that's where we come up with our weights. We also are going to be using the internal research team to do some additional analysis on that data, and we're hoping also in this process we're going to be validating our key indicators as well. And then we're looking at, we did have a conversation, we are looking at bringing in 2 contractors for this process. The first one being an external survey data gathering group. We are in the process of reviewing some applications. And then we're also bringing in NARA as a consultant for the methodology. In those conversations with NARA, we recognized that there were some additional steps that we really wanted to emphasize. We knew that they were there, but we weren't emphasizing them. So we have the policies and procedure writing and the public comments and finalizing of our weights. So we want to make sure that that's included in the entire licensing spectrum. And then also we recognize there needs to be some training development of staff training on how to correctly use these weights. And then, of course, in order to validate that we have done our job right, we need to run a 6-month pilot statewide to gather the data in order to evaluate how our weights have taken place and what adjustments needs to happen. So that's, in a nutshell, where we are as far as the methodology and the timeline. I think that's it. Is there any questions? And Lubick can help out with this too.
So we'll wait just another couple of minutes for people to digest all of that information. Thank you, Sonia. We haven't had any questions come in yet, but we'll wait another minute or two. Okay, so we haven't had any, oh, it looks like we have one question. So the question is, what role does our subcommittee have in the timeline of the weighted WAC process?
I would actually defer to Luba on that one.
So I think I'm unmuted, is it correct?
Yes, that's correct,
Can you
Luba.
hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm not quite sure I understand the question. So we're talking about subcommittee. I'm not quite sure about what particular subcommittee the question is about. If we're talking about advisory committee or we're talking about
Luba, I would answer it from the advisory committee perspective. I think that that's what the question was. But if there's a clarification on that, if you want to send that in. But I think that's the question. What role does this committee have in the weighted WAC process?
So the process of the timeline. So the timeline is defined, and it's a part of their alignment timeline or WAC alignment timeline that's been introduced by Director Hunter approximately a couple of months ago. And we discussed the purpose and goals of changing some of the milestones or some of the activities on the timeline and why we're changing them. So I will refer you to the couple of previous meetings at the advisory committee to go back to this information and review it. In regard of the overall weighting WAC process, it's all based on the Dr. Sfinin methodology. It's what Sonia been referring to, and methodology is a research-based methodology. So we don't have a lot of wiggle in regard of how we setting up the process, because it's all defined and there is a reliable and valid data behind it. The only piece that we have some level of flexibility how to arrange it is the focus groups. Some states who've been involved in the weighting WAC process skipping this particular step, but we decided to include the step into the process because we do believe that it's important for the community as well as for the advisory committee to be able to provide a level of input. Do we need to move to the weighting process all of the standards, because we believe all of the standards have significant impact on health and safety of children, or we may need to move to the weighting process, a subset of the standards, because not all of them possibly may cause injuries or fatalities for children and families, including frequency of violations or deficiencies, as well as a combination of different violations and deficiencies. So, and as we're talking about focus groups, the are pretty much defined. We all understand that focus groups is not a community input process. Focus groups meaning is that we have a group of experts who will be able to provide us with the particular recommendations. So right now we are working on working with the NARA and in defining this focus groups, scope of work, and possible protocol around it. And we will continue to work with Thrive by 5 and e-learning coalitions in order to organize statewide focus groups, figuring out moving, again, all subset of the WACs to the weighting process or some particular part of it.
Thank you, Luba. And there was another question about, are there models from other states that we could look at, and I really think you addressed that in your answer, that that's part of the work you're doing with Dr. Feeney and NARA. You've really been reviewing the methodology that other states have used and really using that to inform our work.
Correct, and I will be more than happy to provide a link to the NARA website where all of the current activities around differential monitoring processes are listed, and NARA, as we all know, National Association of Regulatory Administration, supporting all of the states, not only states because it's an international association, as well as other countries to work on it. So you will be able to see it on the NARA website and review, let's say, Colorado or Georgia or Ontario, Canada, just recent kind of experiences. But there are other states who operate based on the weighted process for a long time, for example, Illinois.
Great. Thank you, Luba. So if there are not any other questions on this particular section, so I am going to pass this over to Debbie and Kelly, who are really going to give us some updates on the progressions. And so, Debbie, we'll start with you.
Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, and this is Maureen. I'm sorry. Kelly, if you enter your PIN, I can unmute you, but I can't unmute you until you do that part. Thanks. All right, Debbie,
Hi,
we're ready.
good morning. Okay, can you hear me okay?
We sure can.
Great. Okay, thank you. Well, we've got some exciting things going on with the standards alignment work, and there right now currently are 3 different work groups working in different directions to finalize some standards. And we've got a work group with our technical writer that Nicole mentioned earlier, and with a legal background as well. And so just working on tightening the language up, making sure that there's clarity, enforceability, that it reads well. And then we also are partnering with a Assistant Attorney General in regards to some of the legal aspects of our standards writing. So we have that work going on and anticipate to be done by the end of October with some finalized draft on that piece. We also have another group working on the justification section that many of you have seen in our template, and really working towards making it a little more comprehensive, adding some more supportive resources and documents that were utilized during the writing process. So we will be making some additions on that. That will be helpful for our community conversations, our leadership conversations, and also with our negotiation conversations in the future. So just adding some more supporting information there. And we also have had our internal licensing staff working on a review, and they have been working hard this month in regards to implementation strategies. So in their review they've been working on, is the WAC clear to me? Do I understand how to implement it? How to support the providers in the process of compliance with the WAC and the new standards, and just the enforceability. So we've got some hard work going on this month, a lot of behind the scenes that's happening with these 3 groups. And the internal review, we'll probably use a little bit more time to make sure everyone has opportunity to thoroughly review those, probably for a couple more weeks. So some great work being done to just really polish things up and get it ready to move forward. And obviously that will funnel into the weighted WAC process as well. So that's where we're at with the licensing piece.
Great. Thanks, Debbie. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelly, and we'll start with this slide. And then, Kelly, let us know when you want us to progress it to the next one.
Great. I will. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. It worked. Hi, everyone. So we have an incredible team of staff across licensing, early achievers, and ECAP that have been working really closely together on this next phase of standards progression. And to date, we're feeling really good about the solid plan and a shared vision that we've built to take us through this writing process. So right now, teams are currently, work is underway. Teams are working together right now on family engagement standards, and we'll have a first draft of that completed at the end of October, which I'll get a little bit more specific about that in the next slide. But before we go there, as we embark on and think about this part of the writing process where our focus is really updating the early achievers and ECAP standard, we're taking a really structured and thoughtful approach to ensuring that when we're reviewing, when we're doing the writing, we're making sure that we're doing really solid reviewing and making considerations around nationally recognized best practices, looking at the most current data and research, obviously taking into consideration along the way stakeholder input, which is another thing I'll talk about in a minute in more detail, and contract requirements. An example of how we're doing this in our work right now, and again, just one example, is our work to consider the brand new Head Start performance standards, which Nicole mentioned earlier and said that I would talk about. So this is the part where I'm talking about that. And we've heard a lot about that. We've heard, as a department, we've heard a lot about these new standards from our partners in the field, especially those who are operating both Head Start and ECAP in the same organization. Because as you can imagine, for them in particular, alignment around these standards are really, really important in implementation. But we also know that it's really important for the larger system as well. So we'll continue to really zone in on those new standards as we walk through this process and do as much alignment as humanly possible. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide if you would. This next slide is an actual visual timeline. And the first thing to note about the timeline is that it represents the due date for the initial drafts of the sections that we're reviewing across early achievers and ECAPs, and across ECAP, early achievers and ECAP, geez. So teams are going to begin the writing process for their section with plenty enough time to meet the deadlines. We've really been thoughtful about building in enough time because, as you can imagine, we're also building in stakeholder input along the way, which we'll get into a lot more in our next advisory committee meeting when there's a much larger focus on the early achievers and ECAP writing. So recently our work has really been focused on the transition of the planning, the management of this progression writing process, this part of progression for early achievers and ECAP. So we've been doing a lot to adjust the timeline, working with our coordinating teams, because as you can imagine, you know, we're getting better and better at this, but it can be a complicated process, you know, given that everybody has full-time jobs, bringing people together. And so it's a lot of coordination work, and I just really want to say thanks to our team who continues to work really hard to, you know, make sure our schedules are aligning and bringing licensing, early achievers, and ECAP folks together on a very frequent basis. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, our family engagement teams for the sections of early achievers and ECAP are currently drafting those sections because we'll be looking at those first. But I also wanted to say that our enrollment and eligibility team, particularly that for ECAP, have been working on the first draft of that together since mid-August, as this is one of those sections that we know is likely going to take more time than many of the other sections because of the complexities involved in eligibility. And we really want to make sure we're getting that right and getting it well vetted as well. So at our next advisory committee meeting, I'll wrap this up here, we're going to go into a lot more detail about the process we've developed and outlined here, including how we intend to gather stakeholder input. We're going to talk much more about our commitment to embed an equity lens throughout the process, and we're going to talk much more about continuing to really ensure that we're upholding the alignment principles set forth through this process in the Early Start Act. So when I say we're going to be talking much more about that, I want to be specific to say we'll be looking to you as our advisory committee to continue to really help us think about what that should look like. We, you know, recognize there are multiple sections in this, and it is going to require us to adapt and to course correct along the way. So we're hoping we're going to learn a lot through the process, and we're going to be leaning on all of you to help us through that. So I think, Nicole, that's it. So I think we can go to questions now.
Great, thank you. And there aren't any questions just yet, so we'll wait just a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and start talking about meeting summary and next steps and allow people some time if they still want to type in their questions. I want to thank you all for taking the time today to participate on the call. As we talked about, we're really here at the department beginning to focus on sort of what does operationalizing all of this work mean as we think about that coordinated monitoring and quality improvement process, as well as doing some really intentional focus on what the weighted WAC process will look like. As I said, Sonia is leading a lot of that work. And then a big piece of the work is some of what the technical writer is doing, and then what the licensing ECAP and Early Achievers teams are doing right now as you look at that timeline as they continue to build out those progressions. So we will be continuing to outline the community feedback process, as Kelly talked about, and building in some of the equity lens pieces when we talk with you again. And that is really sort of the big work that's happening as we move forward with this. So if there are no other questions, I think you all have a bit of a gift of time. We will also be getting out soon, if you don't already have them, the next meeting dates for the advisory committee, so look for those in your email. I do just want to note that you all have been used to getting those from Maureen, and we will be transitioning the coordination of this work to some of our team members in the QPPG division, so you will likely see things from Kate Darling or Svenja. And so we'll be going through that process now, so don't be surprised if you get an email from a new person. We're all still working together, just sharing some of the coordination of this work. So thank you all again for being with us on a Friday, and enjoy this free gift of time. Have a great day.